This is Radio Ecoshock with Alex Smith.
This is Radio Ecoshock. I'm Alex Smith. The heat, drought, and fires in Russia during the summer of 2010 were truly shocking. To make sense of this, we're joined by Vladimir Tchouprov. Vladimir, were you in Moscow during the heat wave, and can you describe your personal experience of these events?
This is Vladimir Tchouprov. Yes, all this summer I spent in Moscow. And 2 weeks was most difficult, as it was a smog, around-the-clock smog in Moscow. Just to explain you, it was smelling with fire, so with temperature plus 40 degrees Celsius, which is absolutely untypical for Moscow, which is 20 degrees above the typical temperature this time. The visibility in the street, this distance of visibility was about 200 meters. People walking in the street with masks, not all of them, but a lot. And in a few hours of walking the street with masks, the mask is becoming brown. The air was full of carbon monoxide, which caused a lot of deaths, and the death rate in Moscow decreased twice. So it was quite horrible. So people waiting all the time, so it was impossible to open windows around the clock, especially in the night, as then the smoke get to the flat, inside. So it was very extreme, especially for children and the people having disease, blood and lung disease. So all the people had shock, as it was quite untypical, and people were not ready for such extreme conditions, weather conditions. And psychologically, it was very frustrating, as people understood they can do nothing in this situation because the Ministry of Emergency Situation, who was in charge for firefight in this pit box near Moscow, they could do nothing. And it was a situation when the human being could not control the nature processes, which was very unusual and typical, and it showed that sometimes that the humankind, it coming to end, so it cannot control anything in this planet. So psychologically, it shaked Russian public, Russian society. As a result, according to the last poll opinion results, showed that the number of people believing to climate change and recognizing the climate change as a serious problem created by humankind increased from 20% to 28%. For Russia, it's a real jump up in understanding this problem. You should know that a Russian public as well as political elites is quite skeptical towards the climate change issue, things like carbon emissions, climate change effects, etc., etc. So for Muscovites, for majority of Russian people, it was a real shock, and public opinion was shaken.
I'm wondering whether the Russian press is part of the factor in not preparing people for the possibilities of what can really happen under climate change.
It was very interesting experience. Yes, the people were not really prepared for such a climate change, as in the previous time, the Russian authorities, the highest politicians, they said they are in favor for climate change as it's very beneficiary for Russia, as it will open the Arctic shore for oil drilling, it will create better conditions for agriculture, etc. But this summer showed that it's wrong. It's wrong, and it's brought real results and showed real impacts, negative consequences of climate change for the community, for the people.
And I'm wondering, what about the personal experiences? Well, the effects of this outside Moscow. We had a lot of publicity here in the West about the smog and people wearing masks, as you said, but it seemed we had much less coverage about the fact that villages burned down and people had to be evacuated and what was happening out in the hinterland, so to speak.
Yeah, well, we can say that Russia consists of two parts, the Moscow and the rest of Russia. It's quite bad as all the policy of Russia depends on the opinion of Muscovites, people living in Moscow. But yes, the people outside of Moscow were damaged and suffered by these heat waves and droughts, as officially 50 people killed in these fires. About 100 villages were evacuated. Thousands and thousands of people lost their homes, and now they're living in the hostels, in the hotels. So this is real tragedy for 1,000 families living outside, who lived near forests, and now they're damaged by these fires. A lot of human stories we learn in media this time. Sometimes these stories are quite horrible. Not all these stories and information we know we receive through the official federal channels, TV channels, which are monopolized by the Kremlin. A lot of stories when firefighters didn't protect people, but they protect houses and buildings of oligarchs. A lot of stories when people asked firefighters to come and to help to them, but they didn't have good enough equipment to help people. You should know that in Russia 2 years ago the firefight system was abolished, and all these functions were handed to provincial level, where they do not have any resources to handle this system. And the firefight system mostly fitted to work with the fires in the cities, in infrastructural sites and objects. So in this case, we saw a lot of stories and information for analysis. What the system, how it cannot protect people, how people had to protect themselves. So these fires this summer showed that the potential for volunteers movement in Russia is quite high, and people reacted immediately to call to people who ask this help. But another side of this medal, the government, the state, could not organize this activity. So people self-organized. They collected all the stuff, all the money, equipment to fight fire, etc., organized these fight fire brigades. But the state even didn't provide them with information, how to operate, where to go, or even sometimes they disturbed to them. So it was quite a lot of human stories around this fire this summer.
And I think that there will be comparisons to the U.S. Government's failure to respond to the Katrina situation after that terrible hurricane hit New Orleans. Well, another thing that I think is different here about this situation is in Europe, when they had the terrible heat wave in 2003, it came after they had managed to harvest their wheat and their grains, whereas in Russia it was right at harvest time, and there was a huge impact, as we know, on the grain situation in Russia. Can you talk just a little about that?
Yeah, the two sectors, economical sectors, mostly damaged due to these heat waves are agricultural and forest sectors. In agricultural, the official economical loss is about $1 billion equivalent, US dollars equivalent. In forest, it's much higher. It's few $billion US dollars direct economical loss equivalent. But according to some independent economists, the loss is dozen times higher, which could reach 10-15 billion US dollars for the whole Russian economy, mostly for forestry and agriculture. In agriculture, Russia this summer lost 11 million hectares of the fields, where Russia lost about 20% of its crops, and it brought to the situation where when Prime Minister Putin decided to shut down the crop export, Russian export to international markets, which checked international markets as well. In forestry, Russia lost about 5 million hectares of forests. Not all of them were burned down, but as minimum 20-30% did. So it's a real impact for forestry sector as well. As well as to farmers who lost this harvest, and now they're seeking the support from the state. The good news is that the state is going and promised to provide financial support to the farmers suffered by these heat waves. And another problem we discovered for agriculture, for example, is insurance system. We understood, and it's very obvious, the existing insurance system do not have enough potential to cover such extreme climate weather conditions, such consequences for agriculture, for example, which means that the humankind system to prevent or to adapt, financially adapt to climate change is not enough answer for such extreme change in climate conditions.
And I'm sure that will be the situation again here in North America. This is Radio Ecoshock. Our guest is Vladimir Tchouprov, a climate and energy campaigner with Greenpeace in Moscow.
Check out the Radio Ecoshock website. We're at ecoshock.org.